was the dumbest rule your school thought up? Story 1 update. Starting from 2023, we have updated our subreddit rules specifically. Don't be a to each other. Top-level responses must contain genuine efforts to answer the question. This is a strictly no-politics subreddit. Please keep our AskReddit a great subreddit by reporting posts and comments which break our rules. I am a bot, and this action was performed automatically. Please contact the moderators of this subreddit message compose to our AskUK if you have any questions or concerns. Story 2 mandatory showers after every PE lesson, even if that PE lesson had overran, was the last lesson of the day and would mean missing the bus home. When this occurred to my class, and we all chose to catch the bus in our PE kit rather than shower, and change resulting in us missing the bus, a letter went out to our parents informing that we would be made to endure supervised practice showering every day at lunch for a week. All that this achieved was near on 30 sets of parents rocking up at school the next day, demanding to speak to the teachers that want to watch their kids shower. This was the late 80s, early 90s, and so once the parents kicked off, the policy was dropped, and nothing more was mentioned about it. Had that happened now, it would have likely and rightly been a massive scandal. Story 3 during a particularly hot summer, my school made the decision that girls would no longer be required to wear ties, but the rule for boys remained the same. As a result, many boys stopped wearing their ties to school. The school attempted to discipline them, but this led to a significant number of complaints from parents. Eventually, my school reversed their decision, and all students were required to wear ties again. Story 4, if any part of your shirt was untucked, instant detention. Just stood up and came untucked. Detention. Reached for something high up on the shelf and came untucked. Detention. Left the toilet and missed tucking in your shirt. Believe it or not, detention. Story 5, they tried to ban lunchtime football because a lad got a ball in the face. Nobody paid attention to the ban, and when about 50 lads turned up for detention every evening, they reversed that decision after a few days. Power and numbers and all that. Story 6, no talking on penis inspection day. So we all had to stand there in silence. Was never as fun as it once was when we could chat amongst ourselves. Felt humiliating, to be honest. Story 7, I was once cornered getting off the bus in the morning and told I wasn't allowed to wear a scarf because I wasn't wearing a coat. As someone who rarely got into trouble at school, I was super put out by this ridiculous notion. So I actually matched straight to my head of year to confirm it was nonsense. Bus monitors were just bored that morning, I suppose. Story 8, girls in the school I work in aren't allowed to wear socks that go over their knees. You read that right, their socks must be below their knees. Longer socks will be confiscated. This baffles me. Are over-knee socks stripper socks or something? Like what? Story 9, all-girls school in the late 90s, no wearing strappy tops because it distracts the male teachers. The lesbian teachers could control themselves, but the men couldn't apparently. Everything about that rule is insulting to everyone. Story 10, primary school. They banned footballs because they were dangerous and rucksacks because a teacher tripped over one and almost broke her neck. We had to buy school-issue plastic bags to carry our stuff. They also binned off the football team when I was in year 6 because they didn't have a male teacher to run it, and they refused to allow a parent to do it. Absolutely gutting. Story 11, someone at a different school got hit in the eye with a flapjack, and I think they had to go to hospital, so the council decided to ban square flapjacks. They replaced them with triangular ones. Story 12, my school would close on snow days, but the gates were still open, so lots of people would turn up anyway, knowing that there would be untouched snow on the fields and that you could sled down a couple of slopes. Teachers were never there, but sometimes the caretakers would join in. Story 13, went to view this school for one of my kids. It was like an episode of Black Mirror. A lot of people love this school's policies, but it wasn't for me. Story 14, did anyone else's school not let kids inside until the first bell of the day rung? Even when it was freezing, sub-zero temperatures, as I used to get in about 40 minutes before school started, had to just stand outside in the cold. Even when there were teachers inside enjoying their warm cups of tea, annoys me to this day. Story 15, we had an odd rule for a little while that the only language allowed to be spoken at school was English, which was fine for the most part, but we ended up with some people joining who didn't speak a word of English, and a teacher gave them detention for it consistently. I realized years later he was just a racist. Practice French with others, including the French teacher. Detention, talk to someone who doesn't speak English in their own language. Detention dropped after about 2 weeks after said idiotic teacher ran into a room and tried to give the whole room detention during a French lesson. Didn't see him again after that. Story 16, in my secondary school, girls weren't allowed to wear trousers, and we were only allowed to wear tights with our skirts between November and February. If you were caught wearing skin-colored tights, you would be sent home. We also had uniform checks where we had to kneel down in the hall to make sure our skirts touched the floor. Thankfully, I was only there for 2 years before moving, and I heard they changed policy to allow girls to wear trousers about 2 years after I left. Story 17, you had to wear your blazer in the corridors, and you needed permission to take it off in class, which was sometimes denied if it's 25 degrees out and the school has no air conditioning and no windows that open. It's too hot to wear a blazer indoors. Story 18, I once returned to school after the summer holidays where I had been growing out my hair male, and by the time I returned to school, it was shoulder length. I was pulled into the office and told that my hair was outlandish and not what was expected of the school for a male pupil. My sarcastic response was that ID, just coming the next day wearing a dress. That one landed me at attention. In the end, my hair was left as is. Story 19, we had to take our coats and jackets off before we went inside the school buildings. There would be teachers at the entrances to buildings forcing you take it off whilst you were standing in the rain. They said that coats distracted learning. Story 20, nobody is allowed to remove jumpers or blazers without asking for permission, and all girls had to wear both. One summer, 3 of us fainted in the science lab because the teacher denied us the chance to take one of our 3 layers off. One girl slammed her head on the table behind her on the way down, and someone had to prop me up when I went so I didn't fall off the tall stool. Absolutely mad, and it's a wonder someone didn't faint using Bunsen's or acids. Story 21, if we were catching public transport and not the designated additional cost school bus, we had to have a change of clothes to wear on it, even if the designated school bus wasn't an option as it didn't go anywhere near where you lived. This was for both to and from the school, and meant you had to leave home earlier than most and arrive home later due to having to factor in time change. The clothes you chose to wear for the journey were also checked, so they fitted in with the school ethos, even though they were your own clothes, and the point was to ensure that the school wasn't associated with people who caught public transport. Story 22, if you score below 40 on any test, you had immediate detention. There were weekly quizzes. I basically spent 2 years in detention every second day until they repealed that rule. Story 23, we had to wear fleeces over shirts. Even in summer, we had to ask permission to take it off. Some teachers were cunts, chemistry in particular, and he would never let you take it off, which resulted in many detentions, people fainting, etc. The rule never changed. We also weren't allowed to take it off between classes and weren't allowed to drink water in class. Then I was off for quite a while and came back and to find out they'd taken issue with the underwear girls were wearing and were trying to check it. So it was like lift the band of your knickers over your trousers to show them it wasn't a thong, and take your jumper off so they could check if they could see your bra through your shirt. Needless to say, there was uproar. They tried to enforce the shower thing at our school, too, but the bullying was atrocious, and in the end, I never had to do PE again. I ended up injured in year 9 and wasn't allowed to do it. Then in year 10 and 11, I went to college 1 day a week and just happened to be on PE day if you weren't taking it as a GCSE. Story 24, judging by some of these comments, there must have been a massive pedophile problem before the 2000s in schools. Penis inspection day and supervised practice, showering WTF. I finished secondary school in 2011 and never had like this. Story 25, not my school, but I heard of one where you weren't allowed to ask your lunchtime neighbor to pass you something, and instead you had to offer it to them. So instead of saying, please pass the salt, it was, would you like some salt? No thanks, but would you? Yes, please, here it is. Wildly inefficient, and I'm not convinced that offering something that you don't have is any more polite. Story 26, so I went to school in Wales, and when it got to GCSEs, it used to be that if you didn't choose to take it, you had a mandatory Welsh lesson once a fortnight. However, for my year, you were forced to take long course Welsh, like 3 or so Welsh lessons a week. It put me off taking any other languages, which sucked, but I could only concentrate on learning one language at GCSE lesson. I'm pretty sure they went back to how it used to be the year after, so we were literally the only year group forced to take Welsh as a GCSE. I got an A, but to this day, I only remember primary school level Welsh. Turns out, talking in Welsh exclusively about the benefits of bilingualism doesn't help you become actual bilingual, since you couldn't really hold a proper conversation. Story 27, couldn't touch handrail or the walls when walking up downstairs. If you were given a punishment, you couldn't challenge it until after you had done whatever punishment was imposed. So on my first day, first lesson, I got a 2-hour detention for giving my correct name after the teacher asked for it. Even though it was written in the register, and my form teacher, head of year, headmaster all corrected her, that was my name, I still had to do a detention because she was racist. She apologist said to the headmaster. Story 28, our school tried to implement a rule that hair could only be brown, black, or blonde. That one was weird, basically happened because early mid-aughts and a lot of emo culture caused multicolor hair and stuff, and the head teacher said it was distracting. 2 major things wrong with this rule. Two of the teachers, including the deputy head, both had unnatural hair colors. One had pink, the other had blue trim, which caused a lot of detentions in the first week, because people would around in their classes and then claim that their hair was distracting them, the second thing. Well, ginger kids got letters sent home to parents asking them to dye the kids' hair to be more natural. Thing lasted a week until it was canceled, and the head teacher only lasted a year because he kept trying to make up incredibly dumb rules. Story 29 at my secondary school. We had to wear our jumpers. We were only ever let off if the person checking uniforms deemed it to be a hot day. As a fat kid who was perpetually hot, I had to sit and suffer sweating like mad wearing my jumper. Story 30, my school made a specific rule, just for me, where I wasn't allowed to wear my hair loose. It had to be tied back. Curly hair problems. I think they just hated me specifically. Edit to add, one teacher took issue with pencils pens being held with too many fingers. So I had to use a special grip to ensure I was only using one finger on top instead of two. Story 31, my secondary school band skirts for girls. Boys could still wear shorts when it was hot. The official statement was that skirts ailed to cover the wearer's modesty, particularly when walking upstairs. This was in 2011. Story 32, we had some old guy who came as substitute teacher once. He introduced hitting us with a paddle if we did something wrong, talking out of turn, that's a paddlin', looking out the window, that's a paddlin', staring at my sandals, that's a paddlin', paddlin' the school canoe, oh, you better believe that's a paddlin', he would say. Story 33, no one was allowed to leave the school during lunch, including sixth form students. Luckily, that one didn't last too long. But then they said sixth form students couldn't leave the premises when they had a free period. It would be used for supervised study. So everyone who finished at 11 a.m. and didn't have classes until 1 p.m. would be hanging around school for 2 hours and not studying. Because why would you, unless you actually needed to do something, and the worst was for students whose free period was the last period of the day. So instead of leaving at 23:03, they'd be hanging around school until 4 for no reason other than school rules said so. Story 34, we had a one-way system at school. So some staircases could only be used to go up and others down. If you're caught using the wrong staircase, you get a detention. It made sense when it was busy, but you could still get a detention if there was literally no one else around. Story 35, one-way corridors. Coming out of room 304, your next lesson is in 302. Bad luck. Even though the door's only 8 feet away. That's the wrong way. You have to do a full circuit of the building. Story 36, you had to ask a teacher for permission to take your jumper off. If they agreed, then the permission only counted for that class. And in that classroom, the jumper had to go back on to move between classrooms or to go home. This rule could be waived if the headmaster put a notice on the notice board outside his office that said jumpers may be removed. He only did it for the very hottest days. Story 37, not exactly a rule, but sort of, and I was thinking about it yesterday. They gave us a reading list for an A-level English essay that included a book about the novel we were reading. There were 20 of us and 2 copies of the book, one in the school library and one in the public library, and a tight deadline that made sharing impractical. It honestly seemed like an exercise in increasing stress rather than increasing knowledge or skills. I eventually left that school partly due to stress and mental illness. A couple of years later, I did an English A-level. This ridiculous treasure hunt had been completely unnecessary. Anything we needed to know should just have been explained. It was just a level. Story 38, they banned the word sussed. This was in the mid-'80s, and there was a brief trend among school kids, whereby if you proved someone wrong, you got in the face and went, ha. Sus the headmaster wasn't a fan of this, so banned the word. Story 39, boys had to wear black socks. They brought this in Y10 and would give detentions over it. I was a girl who wore trousers, and the teachers were never quite sure if I was allowed to wear white socks or not. I never got told off for it, though, which annoyed some of the boys. They also decided that you had to have charcoal gray trousers and skirts down to mid-calf just after I left. This meant that you basically had to buy the more expensive stuff from school uniform shops or risk detention. Oh, and also after I left, they decided you couldn't hang out in groups of more than 4, and you couldn't wear a hood unless it was raining. Story 40, we had a time-measuring template thing that our ties were checked against. Cue a lot of grumpy cool kids with their backward skinny ties. Also, until old headmaster retired, no trousers for girls, which wasn't a big issue for me because I prefer skirts and always did, but there were a lot of very unhappy girls until he left. Story 41, there was a mudslide on the playing field. We weren't allowed to play on it. They didn't supervise it. They only would punish kids who came to class muddy. Bullied kids would be dragged down the slide, then go to class, get detention, and have to wear a lost property PE kit. When they were then further teased for wearing lost property and smelling, teachers would say they should have thought about that before playing in the mud. Then they'd be kept in detention, giving bullies chance to go home, get changed, and wait for them to leave school alone. Detention was awful for bullied kids. Leaving school on time meant you could get lost in the crowd. I remember one kid, the bullies made him believe they were friends and invited him out for a water fight they filled their water guns with. Sorry for the rant. Story 42. So we didn't have blazers. In fact, we were the last year to not have to wear them. They introduced them right as we were leaving, so the rest of the school ended up wearing them. But they didn't make us do so in year 5, as I guess they figured it unfair to make us buy them for just 1 year, which was about the only common sense thing they ever did. Rules-wise, girls could only wear skirts, not trousers. Tights could only be worn in the winter months. Skin-colored tights weren't allowed. Skirts to be knee-length. For everyone, shirts tucked and you'd untuck the minute you got out of eye line, and ties to be of appropriate length. Honestly, we wore them the wrong way round and short on purpose. So you had this thin four-tie, which looking back seems stupid, but, peer pressure and all that. The jumper rule was the weirdest. We couldn't wear hoodies, we couldn't wear round-neck jumpers. We had to wear V-necked only. Didn't matter if it was the school color and if it had the school logo on it, though you couldn't, as nobody sold it separate. No coats indoors either, so if it was cold, you just went cold. No earrings for boys. Studs only for girls. They later allowed studs for boys. Only earlobes for both. No other piercing locations allowed. Visible mandatory shower after PE. Teacher checked. Rugby top when outside, playing rugby foodie whatever from September onwards regardless of temp. No colored hair. Oddly, there was a phase where lads got their head shaved bar, keeping a fringe. This didn't get them in trouble at all. I think the teachers laughed. TBH, my own children would have been put in isolation for such a haircut. Early 90s FTW. By which I mean they were strange times indeed. Story 43. At primary school, we weren't allowed yogurts. Apparently, so that poorer students didn't get jealous. Which makes no sense. I suspect now, as an adult, that was probably a rumor, and it was more so no one makes a mess of themselves. I once got a detention for sneaking in a frub. Story 44. Shorts all year, in all weathers. No eating in school uniform outside the school. Caps to worn at all times outside, even in the quad. There was a walkway on one side of the quad that was only for the sixth form, swimming naked if you forgot your trunks. Story 45. Boys in sixth form were banned from wearing those 3 decathlon pumps that were all the rage at the time for health and safety reasons, whilst the head teacher paraded around in Louboutin high heels. Story 46. In primary school, only being allowed to use a specific fountain pen that the school sold, and no other pens. Being left-handed and a child, all my work was smeared with ink, so I got given lunchtime detentions. This was the early 90s. Story 47. The teacher wouldn't allow us to wear coats or jumpers during lessons outside. So we had to do the cross-country run, or netball, etc. in t-shirt, a tiny skirt, all while she shouted at us to move quicker, wearing her massive fluffy coat thick hoodie. No Pokemon cards, Beyblade, British Bulldog, Manhunt, basically anything fun. Jumpers to worn at all times except during PE. No matter what the weather, mandatory showers after PE. Overseen by said PE teacher. No packed lunches were allowed unless there was a specific reason, i.e. an allergy, and kids who brought money for their lunches ate first. This meant that us poor kids who received a dinner ticket free school meals got the leftover soggy, cold chips, congealed pasta, and soup with the skin on. Don't really miss those days at all. Story 48. School announces ban on hugging, touching, and holding hands. Story 49. We had a girl with anorexia at primary school, so the rules about packed lunches changed constantly to accommodate what she would and would not eat. Crackers in lieu of a sandwich were fine. Then not after it appeared she was done with allowing herself those. Soups, broths, and a thermos were fine. Then not, etc. Everyone had to eat everything to make her feel like she'd eaten less. I've no idea how any of this was meant to help her, either with the anorexia or not being the odd one out. Primaries in the 90s were weird. Story 50. Rewards for attendance. Why not encourage parents to send their snotty little rugrats in, even if they're thick with cold or vomiting during their lunch break? After all, if they get 100 attendance, they can go on a trip to Alton Towers. Overall attendance dropped from 95 to 92. Multiple children with health issues were pulled out of the school altogether. Parents started to complain about how many colds their kids were getting. My mom was caring for my grandparent who was immunocompromised, and my family had to arrange emergency care every time I was sick, which felt like every other week. It cost us hundreds of pounds each time. The Alton Towers trip garnered so many complaints that it was held a month early, and someone went on the trip with flu and knocked out an entire bus full of kids and teachers for weeks. One kid was too ill to sit his GCSEs. Story 51. You had to be in school uniform until you left the gates, which resulted in a lot of people getting changed just the outside of the school gates on a main road in front of passing traffic. Story 52 way back lost in the mist of time, late 70s, early 80s, a concerned local telephoned my school, boys' grammar near the Essex-London border, complaining that he or she had seen boys dripping glue on their ties in order to sniff it. As a result, every boy in the school had his tie inspected by his foremaster to check for telltale signs of epoxy. None were found. Story 53, our secondary school tried to ban outdoor coats. The students went on strike, refused to enter the school. Teachers went out and tried to pull them in, and one got egged. Shouldn't laugh, but she was a witch, so kind of funny. Made the local newspaper. They repealed the rule. Strike over, as you were. Story 54, in my primary school, if someone asked if they could play with you, you had to say yes. You weren't allowed to say someone couldn't play with you. Seems all right on paper until you remember bullies are a thing. Story 55, one day in year 11, there was an entire school assembly, and it all seemed deadly serious, and something important was happening. The headmaster stood there in front of an entire school of teenagers and immediately declared that pulling the fire alarm for a joke was not funny at all, in the slightest way possible, and to only pull the fire alarm if a teacher was not present in the room where a fire was. Let me be clear, this had not happened before at all. No kid had pulled any alarm for a joke or even for an actual fire. Needless to say, less than 4 days later, in 15 or so fire alarm drills, they called another assembly to announce that it was indeed not funny, and that the next student to jokingly pull the alarm again would be immediately suspended. No tolerance. Then there genuinely was an actual fire in a science class while the teacher went out the room. A girl pulled the alarm. Guess what? She got suspended for pulling the alarm for a genuine fire. Story 56, I don't know how true it is because it apparently happened once I left, but my secondary school now has a rule that you can't have any creases on your shoes. Story 57, my entire time at school, I only ever got written up for 2 uniform infractions: not wearing my blazer ID, lost it, and for wearing socks instead of tights because of some arbitrary rule that said we could only wear socks in September and June and tights the rest of the year. Story 58, our school didn't let us wear jackets coats during the day. If you wanted to wear one on the walk to school, it had to be put in a locker for the whole day. Lots of classrooms were freezing cold temporary buildings and were a good 5-minute walk outside. I left school in 2010, and they're still enforcing it now, even when it was -7 a few weeks ago. Story 59, my old secondary school tried to ban wearing hoodies on the commute to and home from school. The only reasoning they had is you're representing the school, even when you're not here. Change that policy fast, since there was clearly no way of enforcing it short of following kids home or searching everyone's bag. Story 60, everybody had to have briefcases and hold them in their right hand at arm's length when walking in corridors, because people would sometimes got knocked in the face by backpacks. Story 61, the only drink we were allowed to have outside was water in a clear plastic bottle. I think this was to prevent people drinking energy drinks and fizzy pop, but it resulted in me getting a detention for drinking blackcurrant. My mate was also put in isolation for drinking Oasis. Story 62, I had surgery on my toe in year 11 and had to wear flip-flops as my bandage couldn't fit inside my shoes. It was summer and warm, so not a huge problem. As a solution, and to help me out, my school banned flip-flops. Just for me, nobody else wore flip-flops. I didn't stop wearing them. Every time I got pulled for it, I didn't excuse it. Just gave them the fact that I couldn't do anything about it. Story 63, my infant and junior school required all boys to wear smart shorts as part of the uniform. Not a big deal, I hear you say, until winter, and it was -4 out. No pants allowed at all, ever, and I wouldn't be allowing that with my kids now. Story 64, am still salty about the banning of Pokemon cards, just cause some little shits flooded the school with fakes, and other kids couldn't spot the difference until it was too late. Story 65, I once got sent home from school to get changed because my shirt was untucked. There was a girl in the head teacher's office at the same time who got sent home to change because she had rolled her skirt up. Needless to say, we went home and did not return that day. Story 66, in primary school, we were called in pairs, boys and girls, to line up at the classroom door and hold hands to walk to the canteen or the assembly hall. To keep us quiet, we had to put fingers on lips, so we had to walk through the school, holding someone else's hand and keeping a finger pressed on our lips. Story 67, I've spoken about this before. We had a one-way system, but the way the school was shaped, you couldn't actually walk one way while staying on the same floor. If you were on the ground floor and wanted to go from the last classroom to the second to last room, you had to go up 2 flights of stairs, across the corridor, back down another 2 floors that brought you out at the opposite side of the school, and then you'd have to walk all the way around. Story 68, new headmistress held multiple assemblies, at least one a week, just for the girls about uniform violations being distracting, the usual short skirts and heels sort of thing. No one was doing anything outrageous. I got pulled up and told my shirt, which was under my jumper, was too see-through. I said ID, just keep my jumper on, as if I had any intention of flashing my Asda George bra to everyone at age 15. Nope, sent home. I never even took my jumper off. Meanwhile, the boys kept showing up in shorts and tank tops and never got told off. At one of our ritual female humiliation assemblies, our head girl had reached her limit and led a revolution of get the boys in here and have them stand at the front while you and other adult teachers point out what parts of their bodies are distracting, or let us go back to class. She was our hero the rest of the year. We never had another assembly like that. Story 69, boys weren't allowed beards or facial hair. Like my friend went through puberty and had a glorious beard, and they were trying to get him to shave it off. We never really did get the reason why. Also, girls weren't allowed nail polish. Again, never really got as to why we weren't allowed that. I've been a teacher for a stint since then, and I still don't agree with those rules. Story 70, they banned Doc Martens boots at my secondary school because a kid had allegedly had a kicking from some skinhead wearing them. Turned out it was just another kid wearing hush puppies, but this was 197,980 and skinheads were everywhere. I only had Docs, and my parents said they couldn't afford to buy more shoes, so I got sent home from school for a week until they realized their error, as most kids wore them and parents complained. Story 71, when I played rugby for the school at weekend, we would have to come in our uniforms. It was a bit embarrassing walking to school on a Saturday morning in my uniform, knowing that everyone that drove past me must have thought I woke up thinking it was a weekday. Also, enforcing a one-way system at all times made no sense. Not that I minded walking slowly around a massive loop to do a short journey during lesson times. Anything to get out of lessons was my motto. Story 72, weren't allowed to speak English, or we would get detention. It was a Welsh medium school, which I get, but it just made me resent speaking Welsh. And I only just in the last couple of years started to feel good about speaking Welsh again. Story 73, my high school created a rule in which certain stairs were upstairs and others were downstairs to fix congestion. This was called the fountain system because we had a school that was basically 3 corridors stacked on top of each other with one set of stairs in the middle and 2 at the start and end of the corridors. The name fountain comes from the upstairs being the one in the middle and the 2 downstairs being the 2 on the outside. Anyway, terrible metaphors aside, this made moving from class to class a nightmare. If you were on the top floor in English and wanted to get to the first floor for social subjects, you would just use the downstairs right next to the class, right? Well, no, because there was a staff only halfway just before you could reach social subject using that specific set of stairs. So in a great deal of pain and exhaustion, you had to go down 1 floor to the second floor just before the staff-only corridor on the first floor and wrap all the way along to the other end of the school, just to go down again to reach the first floor and wrap all the way back around to get to social studies. I'm glad to say this was scrapped. Story 74, my primary school got a new administrator when I was in primary 4 or 5. She was a tyrant. First, she banned us from playing on the grass because she didn't like that we were wrestling there. Then she banned playing TIG. Then she banned running at playtime. Then she banned hanging around in groups larger than 6. Then she banned everyone from sitting on wooden benches that were specifically designed and built for kids to sit on. The average playtime became just standing around not doing anything because pretty much everything was banned. Even talking in the corridors was banned. Every day she discovered a new thing she didn't like and implemented a new school-wide ban to fix it. Everybody hated that cow. Her name was Miss Mitchell. We all called her Miss Bitchell. Story 75, too many. Ex-grammar school for girls. Had to keep to the left when using the corridors, right? Detention. Had to queue outside the classroom in silence before the teacher arrived, or detention. Had to stand in silence behind the desk before the teacher gave you permission to sit. Had to wear navy ankle socks and pleated skirts for PE. White socks, detention. Had to wear white plimsolls and not trainers for PE or detention. Could only wear tights in winter months, and skirts had to be 4 inches above the knee. Exactly, this was the grunge era, where ankle-long skirts were fashionable. No trousers, obviously. Had to wear awful, scratchy and nylon v-neck jumpers with the school logo at all times. Even when it was hot, no jewelry, accessories, makeup of any kind, no watches or even calculators. No short hair. We all had a logbook, and it had to be stamped by a teacher in every lesson. This was checked every week. All course books had to be purchased new, not secondhand, and then wrapped in Christmas paper to protect them. Never understood that one. No ballpoint pens allowed. You had to use fountain pens for all written work. Fountain pens regularly got clogged up and the cartridges leaked. Many ruined pencil cases and clothing. No clothing, bags, or cases with logos on them. Other than the schools, your bag has an Adidas logo on it. Detention, computers were not to be used for any purpose. All work had to be handwritten, research in the library. We had computer labs, but they were always locked and rarely used. I remember one lesson where we played Oregon Trail. with the teacher telling us exactly what to input. Bizarre? Story 76 among many one I remember is being told about how some of the locals had complained because of the behavior of the students. The behavior was atrocious, but the one example brought up was the absolute nerve to wear a hoodie outside of school. This was the same school where the head teacher's response to me being assaulted was to accuse me of lying because he was at the bus stop down the road from where it happened, and it didn't happen there, and that it was all just a misunderstanding. No, sir, they punched me in the face for being gay. Story 77. So the primary and junior school my kids went to was both the same area name, but one was primary, one juniors, with two head teachers who hated each other. For the most part, though, they had the same rules, except the junior school girls could wear trousers from October-April, then with skirts for summer. However, the infants banned trousers for girls, even in winter. My daughter hated skirts, even if she had tights on, and I'm talking reception age was so upset that I kicked off I get uniform rules to a point, but it was stupid to me that in the middle of winter the teachers, all female, can wear trousers, but the kids can't. I ended up setting a petition up and went round both schools and got it signed by so many parents the school decided to listen and do it in line with the juniors. Skirts for summer, which was fine. Even my kid understood that summer was fine, but shed were shorts and tights. 3 days in a row after they changed the rule, they made my daughter change into a spare skirt without tights and was telling her off for being upset. They went to do it again the next day, and I told my daughter to refuse to get changed. So they called me, and I had to go in again and demand the head actually inform her staff she's changed the rules because she hadn't bothered. It still winds me up thinking about it years later.